Welcome to another episode of Twigg and Jenkins. I'm Carri Twigg, my co-host Brad Jenkins.
See, you did it.
I did it.
You crushed it.
And our extraordinary guest, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, dear friend, intrepid Arctic party leader. I don't know what that means. And author of a new book, which I'm very excited about.
I'm excited about it too. It's out in the world.
It's out. How do you feel?
I feel good. It's getting some really sweet attention. A lot of good vibes around this book.
A lot of good vibes.
The title alone has had good buzz for a year.
It's a great title.
Well, I think you nailed the title because I think that becomes a massive stumbling block for so many people, particularly around climate solutions or engaging with the topic at all, is it feels so intractable or so big that people would rather just ignore it because it doesn't, or dystopic, right? So what if we get it right? Nailed it.
Well, that wasn't the original title.
What was the original title?
The original title was something like, on the book contract, signed in 2020, I might add. My other book was supposed to come out first. That did not happen. It was, What Do We Become, How Humans Survive Humanity.
Oh, yeah, not better.
No, this is much better.
This is a better
And
title.
then it was Away from the Brink. Just a little tepid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Jack Reacher novel. Like Away from the Brink. It's like an action.
Yeah.
That's what it makes me think of. Okay, how'd you come to What If We Get It Right?
I have no recollection.
Sure.
I
great.
really wish I had a cute story, and I've got nothing. But once I came up with the title, it actually got harder to write the book. Because how do you meet the promise of a title like that? You know?
But I assume it made the book better.
Well, it made me realize that I
Clarified.
could not actually just write the book. It was intended to be 1/3 the length and a cute little book with some anecdotes and essays, compiling a bunch of thoughts from smart people who are, figuring out this get it right thing.
Right.
But once that became the title, the book became much bigger to try to meet the promise of the title. And it became this series of 20 interviews as the heart of it. And then, of course, the essays and poetry and commissioned art and the whole thing.
I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about the book and about the way that you are promoting the book is its infusion of culture and art and politics alongside the book, which is, I think, something that we need much more of. I think people are so stuck in silos around things, and it's never the twain shall meet, you know? And that's not how we live our lives, and it's not how our brains work, and it's not how these issues work.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, that's part of the reason I wrote the book, because most of what we have in pop culture is actually the getting it wrong examples, right? The apocalyptic projections and films and news. And there's just not a lot of coverage of climate solutions, even though we basically have all the solutions we need. I'm hey guys, it really is a matter of implementation. It's speed and scale is the question, not is it even possible to have a better outcome? It is, right? We know how to do renewable energy and green buildings and regenerative farming and composting and protecting ecosystems and all that good photosynthesis and stuff, electric transportation. It's not a secret.
right.
It's such an approachable...
It's we must wait for fusion for the next 20 years and then maybe do something.
The way you laid it out, too, I was listening to the audiobook version, and it was
Which you recorded, right? With your world-class voice.
It's I'm a little raspy week one here of the book tour, but it's my voice, but also because it's 20 interviews, it's everyone's voice.
It's like a podcast.
It's a 20 episode podcast season in audiobook form.
Well done.
And 3 of the poets who appear in the book read their own poems.
Perform.
Oh,
it's
come
really
on.
good.
Yeah.
I was
Very
thinking in my
nice.
head, I was you could almost... Did you film these or no? No.
They're all on Zoom.
They're
So
all on
I
Zoom.
have recordings, but I considered actually releasing it as a this
Yeah.
series, but it didn't happen.
I love
Right.
the way it's constructed because anything, so many beautiful prologues to really important conversations. A lot of times that's the hardest thing with any issue, but especially climate. It just is so impenetrable from the outside. You're like, yeah, are we talking about regenerative farming? Like, how does the average layman enter? But I think the way that you weave in your own personal story before we get to these issues was quite beautiful.
I just felt, so at one point I was pushed to turn this into more of a memoir, like how I've come to know and understand the things that I have, like what I've studied, the experience I've had in the world, seeing people dealing with the impacts of climate change and working on solutions. And I don't know, I guess I'm like not quite that interested in my own story, but also I didn't think, I just didn't want to do a kind of a first person thing like that.
Sure.
So I packed it all into that opening chapter because I did still think it was important for people to know where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to trust me as your interlocutor through 20 interviews, you're going to trust my curation of like, these are the people we should be listening to. I got to be like, so here's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to ride with me or no? Like, this is just put it out there up front. And then, of course, yes, introducing each of the people I interviewed who are friends.
Yeah.
Longtime colleagues, like people these are my homies.
Right.
Who have been helping me answer this big question for so many years that, yeah, it's fun to be like, well, I met this person in college. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's really fun. Congratulations.
Now they're like doing legitimate stuff and you should listen to them.
As are you.
But isn't that always a funny moment when just like you look around, you're just like, that guy? Wow. All right. Wouldn't have guessed that when we were upside down over that keg a couple years ago. What feels like a couple years ago.
For so long, back when I had a Facebook account, my profile picture was me in like a black cocktail dress and pearls doing a keg stand with like two dudes in tuxes holding my feet and like pearl necklace, like flopping to my nose. And I was like,
that could have been your author photo, on the back sleeve.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Listen, I'm a big fan of my really fancy friends putting absolutely scandalous content on the internet. Like, I think
I try for you, Carri Twigg, but I just can't quite get there.
Well, I think we should bring back the keg stand photo. It doesn't necessarily have to be salacious. It can just be, you can have a PhD and do keg stands and pearls. Like, what's the problem with that? We're dynamic. We're multifaceted, multidimensional people.
This is true.
I have no problem.
I don't actually know if I could drink beer upside down now, though.
It's true. I haven't had
the physics of it is my concern, less the optics.
Like, it's true.
I'd be down to try. I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Philly over the course of the next few weeks.
I mean, this is why I invited you to go on that Arctic trip with me. Because I knew you'd be like, I'm down to try.
Were there keg stands?
I'm down to clown.
No,
but I absolutely would have said yes to it.
Yeah.
That I also would have done.
I'm an easy yes. Like I'll recover, generally speaking. We did go to the Arctic together, which is so fun.
Like
Talk
2
through
weeks.
Talk through it, because you and I talked about it. I kept calling it Antarctica, by the way. I'd be
everyone
like,
everyone.
Twigg, how's the Antarctica?
I mean, my parents, everyone's like, Art Antarctica. That's far, man. You're going to France after that? And I'm like, I'm going north.
Yeah.
To the North Pole.
Yeah.
The photos were beautiful, but I don't think I ever heard what y'all were doing there. What were you doing there?
So it was a very interesting trip organized by a philanthropy trying to bring folks together and get them to care more about climate.
Oh, cool.
Right? The impacts of climate change are being experienced in very extreme ways at the poles. It was not nearly as cold as I had expected. We packed so many layers. And the thing that really got me was just seeing the maps of where the ice used to be, like in very recent past, like a few years ago. And we had to go, so we got into Oslo and then we flew to Svalbard. And then from Svalbard, we like sort of circumnavigated that archipelago, but also we went north of Svalbard. The only reason we did that was because they wanted to show us the pack ice. And you had to go that far north.
Oh, wow.
To even see it. So I woke up one morning and I was like, did we run aground? Because the ship just kept like vibrating and like thudding, but it was like we were going through ice.
Yeah.
So cool.
The thing that sticks with me and almost like haunts me from the experience is how
we haven't had our full debrief.
We haven't debriefed it at all.
This is why you have a podcast. To debrief with your friends about the Arctic experience.
About your shared experiences.
Yeah.
Was how loud it was. because the ice is melting, right? So it's popping, it's cracking. You can hear running water sort of everywhere you go. And so almost every day we were out on the water in a kayak, which we are excellent at kayaking now. Real life passion.
Little tandem kayak cuteness that was happening up there.
Or these Zodiac like speedboats. And yeah, it was just, you could just hear, we saw several calving of icebergs, but you could just hear the popping of the ice as it was melting. It was just like thunder sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was wild. And just to see like glaciers here and here, these glacial fronts, and they're like, those were connected like 2 years ago. And they're like now a mile apart.
Yeah.
Right. Was just pretty stark. Yeah, I wish we had, this is not going to surprise you at all, I wish we had talked more about the science of it.
Yeah.
Like we didn't really get into a lot of how it's changing, how fast it's changing, like what the implications of that are for the ecosystem was sort of a little bit assumed. And I'm obviously, as a scientist, very curious about that.
Sure.
But also I feel like it would have helped everyone, just have a little more context for what they're seeing. Because if you go there for the first time, you're like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
It's very beautiful. I mean, that's what's sticking with me. It's how gorgeous the ice is.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
The turquoise, like the richness of the colors of the ice. And just like how the glaciers are retreating. I think they call them just dead glaciers.
Yeah,
they're
we saw
no
several
longer
like dead glaciers
accumulating at all.
Oh wow.
because a glacier by definition is in motion, right? And so if it's either retreating or just has stopped moving, they call it a dead glacier.
So it was a bummer.
So it was great. Yeah, so that was
dead
cool.
glaciers.
Yeah. We had this one, the story I tell from, not the story, but one of the stories, there was this great little sauna on the boat. And so we'd go out all day and then you'd go in the sauna. And that was where you sort of debrief from your day.
Yeah. It was a big sauna. You could fit like 10, 12 people in there.
Yeah. And there was this one moment, I don't know if you remember it, I found it really funny. It was like the funniest moment of the trip for me, where Ayana and I were talking. We were talking about marrying for money. And Ayana goes, isn't it great though? She goes, that moment that you realize that you're not that you're not a gold digger and wouldn't marry for money is so, and she said great. And I said depressing at the same time. This is such a bummer, right? I'm desperate to be a gold digger.
I mean, that's the flip side of it. Like, it would have been so easy, when you're like dating someone and they're like a B+ and they're loaded. Like, a lot of people would be like,
absolutely, I know. And she's really proud of herself, and I'm really bummed about it.
Can't take the B+.
But I love that you both.
So we made everyone in the sauna crack up because the comedic timing of it was
at the the same moment. She was like depressing, and I was
like despondent. I was just like, I'm desperate to be a gold digger. I just don't have it in me.
I know. You're such a cute trophy wife, though, to all of your friends.
This is such a friend trophy wife.
I've never thought of Twig that way, but yeah.
It's true.
It's great.
No?
It's beautiful.
She shows up. She's the arm candy. She's charming. If you're an introvert like me, it's perfect. She'll chat up everybody, report back on all of their life stories for you. She's like, I'm so busy playing euchre with the senator and the ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good at euchre though.
Yeah.
Get me into a game. I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun. Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things that we've done on your book tour, we've done on our book tour.
Yeah. Carri is absolutely owning this. All of my friends are like, so what's our next event?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Actually, Carri is going to set up a leaderboard for MVP of the tour to see which friend comes to the most stops.
Ooh.
Well, because I was pretty convinced I would win. So I was, of course, setting up a game that I was convinced I was already going to win. But then we've decided on some extra points for other ways of contributing.
Oh, I
like
missed
this.
this.
I like this.
Amber Tamblyn had a custom-made purse of the book cover. Embroidered with recyclable materials or recycled materials. I was like,
She's
that
winning.
is a massive. That's
So many more
points.
points
That's
for
so
that.
many
Points
points
for crafts.
because it's the forethought
Yes.
to have it ready by publish day, to have it ready on the
And
night
then an
before
outfit
friends
that
and family
was
dinner.
like blue pants and yellow shoes and a white shirt. She was like, I'm trying so hard not to tell you about my outfit, but I almost gotta tell you.
I know. And she's helping book a lot of the like celebs. I mean, and she was in the variety show.
She twerked in the variety
twerked
show.
On stage at the variety
You're not-
show after
yeah,
rolling
Amber's
on
winning.
Listen, I'll twerk on a stage. I'm fine with that, but I have not been invited yet. And
I don't know that I invited Amber to twerk. Let's just say
anything for the planet, right? We care about the planet. But one of the things that you did at the variety show that I thought was really great, because she did a packed theater at the Brooklyn Museum, was to bring up two organizations that work and mobilize climate voters. And I think we should talk about climate voters for several reasons. One, because they're not getting a ton of attention in the national conversation, which I think feels to be a huge mistake.
Not to be mean.
There seems to be a big overlap between...
just to be true.
Yeah.
To be true,
Yeah.
Between young voters and climate voters. And so that's sort of alarming, considering the ways that we are underperforming with young people.
Yeah.
And it's, an existential threat that's going to change our lives dramatically. Discuss.
So young people care about climate across parties. Young Republicans are like, also, please stop setting our future on fire.
True.
And climate was a huge issue in the 2020 primary, right?
True.
You had a packed field of Democratic presidential candidates all trying to one up each other on their climate platforms, which was, I think, the most beautiful pissing match I've ever witnessed, right? My climate platform is better. No, mine is better, right?
I remember,
And that was in large part thanks to Governor Jay Inslee, who ran basically exclusively on a climate platform, right? Every debate, no matter what he was asked, he brought it back to climate. And you actually can do that legitimately because everything is connected to the world in which we live. Climate is the context for everything else, right? Whether that's healthcare or migration or education. And so what happened that I think was so beautiful during that primary was, so when Inslee dropped out of the race, Elizabeth Warren picked up a lot of his plans. For example, the American Climate Corps. We've got to put young people to work doing climate jobs, right? Installing solar, managing wildfire risk, replanting wetlands. And when she left the race, Bernie picked up some of her concepts, but really it was about that transition to Biden and getting as much of those climate policies into his campaign promises. And he did something that I don't know that's ever been done before, which was to release a massive new policy plan in the general election. So when Biden had already won the nomination, he got together, it was called this sort of like Bernie Biden task force coalition, something, to make sure that the Bernie folks and then all the others who were on board. And so they developed these policy plans pulling in from a lot of these others. And to me, this is a great example of like, whoever's in power, you have to just push the ideas forward. The ideas don't have to die just because your candidate left the race, right? Yeah. And so he put forward like a super ambitious climate plan in the general. I was not expecting this. Like, I was on the phone with his people and I was like, yeah, I want like the American Climate Corps, and I want better offshore renewable wind policy, and I want us to focus on protecting and restoring coastal ecosystems. And then all of those just like appeared and I was like literally wearing cut-off jean shorts on my stoop in Brooklyn, just being like, yeah, I mean, if you want to know what I think,
let's just throw some more.
Like,
yeah.
And just to see like mangroves get a shout out in that plan, I was like, oh, maybe we're getting somewhere, America. And a lot of those things have happened now. So I think the problem with this, the way this election has panned out, is there hasn't been that primary process to compete on policy proposals, right? That's how we got to where we got. And then a lot of those things happened, and people from all those different campaigns ended up in the administration, in the White House. Right. Maggie Thomas,
shout out Maggie Thomas,
Warren's climate advisor, is now special assistant to President Biden on climate.
Yeah.
And so we just haven't had that arc of this campaign to push, and everyone's like, now is not the right time to push on policy. We just have to win this thing. But without the campaign promises, it gets really hard. You're just missing a huge leverage point. And so we're hearing this whole like rah fracking in Pennsylvania thing, which I'm just like breaks.
I wanted to ask
my
you about
heart.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to know first what you think about that.
I'm from Ohio, so I've been dealing with the politics of fracking for such a long time. Yeah. And I also then did labor for so long, right? Mm-hmm. And so between both of those experiences, fracking has been this super contentious issue. Where we're poisoning groundwater in Ohio, where many earthquakes are happening in Ohio. Like, it's devastating ecological environments. And yet you also have these people who are like, we need jobs. And
that's, of course, just the local impacts, let alone
absolutely
like the global.
Right. And so I think it's tricky. It's like, this is where my personality gets in a lot of trouble, because I want Kamala Harris to win. By all accounts, it looks like this election is going to be decided by kind of working class, middle class white guys across 3 or 4 different states, of which fracking is a message that they have been very specifically targeted and levered to care about. And yet it is so obviously not it's so obviously a step backwards in the kind of broader long-term plans. And this is the kind of nature of the pragmatist and then the politics of something is what are you privileged in any given moment, the short term or the long term?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also, oh man, I don't want to get too, because at the end of the day, we want to win here.
Yeah.
We're pro-democracy.
I too would like to win.
We're pro-democracy. But, I'll equate it to, Twigg and I had a very personal but also thoughtful conversation about immigration a few days ago and what's happening in Springfield. And I think that this is weirdly a really great metaphor for Democrats generally, which is we sort of let the other side define the terms of the debate and the fight. And so when we don't talk about immigration, when things like what's happening in Springfield pop up, we're on our back foot. And we then have to explain away what is happening, as opposed to talking about why what's happening in Springfield is positive for the community and for the country. Meaning, having an opportunity to bring refugees and revitalize towns and economies. I feel like it's the same with climate, which is to say we're on our back foot when we're explaining away why we support fracking, when I don't think anyone knows, unfortunately, all the incredible things that came about because of the Inflation Reduction Act. We didn't hear about it at all, really.
Terrible name. I mean,
during the convention, it was
smartest
mentioned,
and cruelest thing that Manchin did was name it that.
The Inflation Reduction Act. Exactly.
Because, it was Build Back Better, right?
Yes.
Right.
And it's, to be clear, for those who missed it because it was easy to miss, it included in that was $370 billion for climate solutions. But as billions with a B, which has resulted in like hundreds of clean energy projects and something like 170,000 new jobs in clean energy.
Yes.
In the last 2 years alone since
Right.
it passed,
Right.
right? But at the same time, you have Harris at the debate being like, and it also helped expand fracking. And like claiming credit for that as a pro. And so the thing that sort of like, I was like, oh, why are we bragging about like expanding fracking?
Yeah.
Because the one thing that is clear about the climate crisis is we need to phase out fossil fuels.
Right.
Phase them down as quickly as we possibly can. So anything that's about expansion is in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And, when she ran for president last time, banning fracking was in her platform. And so that sort of helps me think that at least she knows better. And that I understand that this is a political calculation. This is why I'm not like
Right.
raw out there, sort of like with my fist in the air about it. And looking at her record, she actually has a really solid, multiple decade record on environmental justice, setting up an office for it in California, suing oil and gas companies and winning, which we love, right? She was the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act as vice president, making sure that got passed. There's plenty of like good stuff to point to. And her plan in 2020 on the campaign trail was pretty good. Yeah. Right.
But this is also that longer term failure. And you cited a statistic at the Climate Variety show about the number of people who identify as a climate first voter, but then don't actually turn out.
8 million.
And that by far makes up for the deficit that we're trying to then get from voters who would support fracking. Right.
And the polling in Pennsylvania, I'm not going to remember all the numbers, but like, the majority of Pennsylvanians aren't excited about fracking because of just what you said. It's a risk to your drinking water, to your groundwater. It's like earthquakes. It's polluting rivers, right? Like it's not like great for people. And it's not that many jobs. There are more new clean energy jobs in Pennsylvania than there are fracking jobs. But it's a matter of winning those voters who would otherwise not vote for you. And it's that's like,
that have been messaged to
the
correctly,
thought that it's
right?
like 1,000 white dudes in Pennsylvania whose vote she is hoping she might win by saying that, is advocating for an industry that she knows is wrong. But like, if you don't win, I mean, I get the politics of it. And I'm just like, wow.
But also multiply that strategy across almost every issue is the challenge.
100%.
So
this goes to this all goes away if young people turn out. Yeah. Like if young people turn out at the rates that they can.
Yes.
That dynamic goes away. If everyone who could,
what is it, like 40% of Americans don't vote, something like that?
Oh yeah, I mean,
it's always the largest demographic of a pie chart. Those that are eligible to vote and do not vote.
Yeah.
And you're right. And so the other thing that I think that's challenging, and look, we're saying all of this with love. With love, because we do want to win. But in this home stretch,
it's just painful to watch.
It's painful to watch because we know that we can win when the policy and the politics are aligned. We can win.
Yeah.
And we don't need to hide what good politics, or I should say good policy is. Mm-hmm. People are smart, especially young people are smart. So I think when you are seen as,
they're smart, but they're unreliable. Like that is
I know.
The problem. That's the problem.
Know.
If they voted, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Kamala
would be the candidate of the right.
It's a vicious cycle though, Twigg, because you can say they don't vote, so then therefore we're going to go after the 1,000 white guys.
Totally. That's exactly what I mean.
But then if you go after the 1,000 white guys, then they're not going to vote, right?
No.
So I think that's why, Ayana, that's why your book, that's why your book and the work that you do is so important.
Yeah.
Because we know it's like we have to be able to reach people in a lot of different ways. We know the campaign is going to be limited with what they can say. Mm-hmm. And that is why brilliant communicators like yourself have to translate and fill in the gaps for people. And I do think Twigg and I were in the convention hall on Thursday, and we were so disappointed. That night was the night where we knew sporadic voters, first-time voters, young people, people of color were going to be watching. And climate did not come up, I think, at all. I don't think it came up at all. No. During the convention. During the convention, that last night when we had, there's like 40, 50 million people watching. I think Congressman Frost was great. He was kind of earlier in the evening, and his speech was
spoke about climate.
Focused on climate. But once you got in that prime time hour, young people are watching, and there was just nothing for them. Mm-hmm. And so this is where,
which is extra disappointing because this administration has an incredibly impressive record on climate in some ways, right? Like I think the problem is there's things like approving the Willow project in Alaska.
Right.
Massive ConocoPhillips project that requires refrigerating the permafrost so that their gear doesn't sink into the mud while they're extracting, right? There's like mind-boggling ridiculousness. But, because of the way our policies and et cetera, it was like a very hard to take back that permit. But, they could have. Right. But there's the politics of Alaska. Right. It's really complicated. And so that was such a big deal. And so many activists fought so hard to stop the Willow Project. So many young people who had never spoken up before got really engaged. And we thought we could win that one. Right. And so you have thousands of people, young people, the impressions on TikTok were off the charts for Stop Willow. And to have that be your first engagement as a young person and then lose what seems like an obvious thing that we should just stop building this massive new oil and gas project, I think was a real turnoff for a lot of people. So they missed, for example, the creation of the American Climate Corps.
Yes.
Putting tens of thousands of young people to work in good climate solutions jobs, right? That was just created out of whole cloth by the Biden administration, championed by our dear Maggie Thomas in the White House, right? They missed the dorky stuff, of course, energy efficiency requirements going up for all of our appliances, which will save so much energy, which means we need to use less fossil fuels, right? There's all this stuff that happened, for example, tax credits for homeowners who want to go solar or insulate their attics or switch to induction stoves or put in a heat pump or whatever. Major tax credits, which is why I did all that stuff this year, right? And most people don't know that any of that happened. We just know when we don't get the thing that we want and it's a big disappointment.
Right.
And I think that's been, to be fair to the Biden-Harris administration, incredibly hard for them to get good press for their wins.
Yes. And
prolific press for the stuff when they don't do the environmental thing. And so the public is just not aware of the good stuff. And Harris certainly hasn't been shouting about it on the campaign trail. When she's bragging about the Inflation Reduction Act, she's bragging about the benefits
fracking.
For fracking,
not
right? And I just have to be I know she knows better.
Yeah.
I remember her last campaign
We
plan,
all know she knows better.
And it's just, we have to suspend
yeah.
our judgment on the things that are very clearly said out of political calculation to get into the White House. And you better believe the environmental movement is ready to push her once she gets in there.
Right, right. So,
but to just, I want to say, answer your question before. On stage at the Climate Variety Show, we had this voter engagement thing, right? So there's two groups that I'm bringing on tour with me, Environmental Voter Project and Lead Locally. And Environmental Voter Project is doing exactly what Carri said, trying to motivate those voters who would otherwise not show up for the polls. But they already have the two qualities that are very hard to get in a voter or in an American. They're registered to vote. You don't have to do a voter registration drive for them. And they already have climate and environment as their number one issue. Extremely hard to get people to prioritize.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other very important competing issues, right? And about 8 million of those registered voters who have environment as their number one issue did not vote in the 2020 election. 8 million people.
What is the
including
demo?
In swing states, of course, right?
I'm so curious because I think people hear environmental voter and they're thinking, affluent, white, coastal elites. But what is the sort of demographic breakdown of an environmental voter? I'm not sure if they.
I'm not sure I have exactly that number, but I do know the statistic for. I can pull it up so I get it exactly right. In the culture is the context section, I believe. So each section of this book has 10 problems, 10 possibilities, and I think, is it in this one? Oh man, I thought I was going to nail this on the first effort. But what it does say here is less than 1% of overall news programming is on climate change.
Oh, yeah.
So if people are missing it, it's because it's not in there.
Yeah, it's because it's not there.
And imagine if there was more of an emphasis, right? So that 8 million, but the baseline is that no one is talking about it, and yet it's still their top issue.
Yeah.
Imagine if it was prioritized in the national discourse, how that number would go up. The only reason I asked the demographic breakdown is because Twigg and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. We've been very focused on young voters because I think this strategy that we're describing that the Harris campaign is focused on, there's no other way to put it. It's just not prioritizing young voters, right? Because if it were, then I think a lot of these issues that we're describing would be prioritized.
Yeah.
But the one thing about climate, from what I remember, when I worked at the White House, that was actually kind of in my portfolio because my job was to sort of be a coalition builder among the progressive left. At the time, we called them progressive. This is before terms like leftist was in the mainstream. And at that time, folks like your friends like Bill McKibben and others were the loudest and so well organized and pushing the White House in such an impactful way, especially around things like the Keystone Pipeline, Standing Rock, all of these huge issues. There was so much money, there was so much excitement, there was so much movement in the climate movement at that time, and it felt so fresh and so new. And again, I'm sort of dating myself because this was, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And what I found so remarkable.
I marched around the White House protesting the pipeline.
That was one of the coolest protests, by the way. And then it was just like,
we had a huge pipeline
and it was all the way around the White House.
We encircled like that whole huge complex, being like,
really
could you
great.
Please not do this, you guys? Can you see how ridiculous this is?
It was really well executed and really well done. But I was surprised even then that it was it was not just all white people, I'll put it that way. There were a lot of, it was multi-generational, it was multiracial.
And the climate justice movement is a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
There's lots of justice-centered organizations working on this because, surprising no one in this room, it is people of color, it is poor people who get the worst impacts of climate change. I found the statistic.
Oh, great.
Just to. So this, on the demographics of it, there's this assumption that it's like white coastal elite. I don't know of that specific 8 million. I could find that out for you. But in the U.S. overall, 65% of Black people and of Asians and 70% of Hispanics are concerned about climate, compared to 47% of white people, which has actually declined from 49%. So this like MAGA climate change is a hoax thing is actually like shifting that percentage, which is a huge concern. So the average person of color is concerned and would like the government to do more in terms of policies. And we just don't talk about that because it's like this vision in our head, right? Of this like white guy on a mountain wearing a fleece and driving an electric car and like backpacking is like the environmentalist. And as Carri Twigg knows, I've dated like 18 versions of that guy. But
you guys both have, to be honest.
But
she's definitely has me beat. She definitely
representative of the environmental movement, as much as it may be.
I have
like
a slightly broader type
my demographic
set.
Personally skews.
God bless.
But I think overall, there's like, there's this other statistic though that 62% of U.S. adults feel a personal responsibility to help reduce global warming. But 51% don't know where to start.
Right.
So it's all these people who are like, does it even matter? How do I contribute? And like, that's in part who this book is for. But if we think about how close these elections are, coming down to thousands, maybe tens of thousands of votes in a few districts, the fact that you have 8 million environmentalists who are registered and are not showing up to the polls is like worth an organization focusing on them, right? And Environmental Voter Project has incredible results with moving, turnout by like a percentage point or two in races where that's the victory, right?
That is the game
They were
changer.
hugely active in Georgia, hugely active in Pennsylvania in the last cycle. And we know how, because of like the A/B testing of people they reached out to versus didn't, we know that they had an impact on those outcomes. And so I've been volunteering with, donating to them for a super long time. And they are just geared up for this election. So if people are wanting to do that voter mobilization, environmentalvoter.org, like, join a phone bank, send the texts, knock the doors, all of that. But I think, we are all focused on the presidential a lot of the time, but these local elections matter so much. And so what Carri saw on stage at my book launch, Climate Variety Show, was a dance revolution dance-off between me and Jason Sudeikis.
Ted Lasso himself.
Where each step on that board was programmed to text a voter to remind them to vote climate. And so we had lead locally there, and they support a slate of down ballot climate candidates, right? Your city council members, your port commissioners. Ports are so freaking dirty. Shipping is such a polluting industry, right? Your public utility commissioners deciding how quickly we move off coal and oil and gas in your municipality, right? Mayors, these are people deciding, do we have composting, municipal composting? Do we have bike lanes, right? All this stuff. The implementation is local. And so they had this DDR dance off where I'm embarrassed to say Jason won by like 3 steps.
Yeah, you lost.
It was like 105 to 108. I did.
I will say you looked
Thank
better.
You so much
this is when Amber started twerking. She was the ref in the competition.
Amazing.
She had a whistle.
She had a whistle and a jersey. You moved with much more style.
I'll take it.
But Jason had you beat.
I mean, we have elections to win, so points for style, but also accuracy.
The results are.
But the thing
you either win or you don't.
When we're both texting environmental voters, like everyone wins, right? And so Lead Locally is coming. They're both coming on tour with me to I'm trying to register volunteers for them for their get out the vote efforts, because if I went on a book tour in September, October of 2024 and just ignored the election,
can you imagine?
Shame on me, and Carri would never speak to me again.
No,
and I care about our friendship and also the fate of our democracy. So, yeah.
Your book is a great intro, though, for what you're describing, because you're right. Like I think it's such a. I will say, as someone who does not follow this issue every day, and it's not in the media every day. Also, Twigg had this really great analogy of NASCAR, right? Like NASCAR's all around and you don't pay attention. Climate is all around us all the time. No one is talking about it. Writing the book, what have you found was something that maybe was like you learned, or something that maybe we're not seeing? Because I feel like, I will say this, and some climate groups may be angry at me, but the one thing I found so interesting when I was working at the White House is
I love a spicy climate take.
Yeah, let's go. Because there was so much money put into making climate more of an issue for the Obama administration to tackle, and then more of an issue for voters to tackle. I will say Tom Steyer is a personal friend. It's a weird life I've led, but I actually in a former life used to work for Tom. So on the finance side. But there was a moment where there was so much money, so many resources, so much excitement. And then I don't know what happened. And I think we sort of woke up, and then I felt like all of that infrastructure around building climate as a political movement died. And the legacy organizations like League of Conservation Voters or, Environment America, like there are groups that have been around for decades and decades and will continue to do this work. And now there's a new generation of organizations like some of the organizations you're just describing. But what happened? Like it's am I being too mean? But I felt like
the short answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
But I will say environmental groups are not showing up in this election as I would have hoped.
Yeah.
Given the freaking stakes, right? I mean, I've seen the scientific projections of if Trump gets elected versus at the time it was Biden, and like what that would mean for America's greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
And I do think it's important to say, for context, the U.S. is the largest cumulative emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, right? If you start from the beginning, we're winning. So everyone likes to blame China and India and say, like, we shouldn't do anything until they do something. Right. It's like we've caused 25% of the global greenhouse gas emissions is on us.
Right.
A quarter globally is America, right? And we are right now the largest producer of fossil fuels in the world. It is not Saudi Arabia. It is not the Middle East. It is the United States of America. So we are absolutely a big part of this problem. And we're just, I don't know. I think my guess, maybe a spicy take, I don't know. Maybe
I love
like
spicy
a
takes.
take. I think environmental groups, like there's a purity test, right? Like, can we endorse this candidate who's going to say in a national debate that she supports fracking. Can we actually get behind that? It's very, like, I'm cringing saying, right? It's like, how can we do that with a straight face to our, you know, our constituents? Our people are going to be like, are you kidding me? And so I think a lot of groups have been like, obviously she's the better choice, but we're not going to throw down for her in that way because of what she's saying.
Yeah.
Like, how can you align yourself with that as an environmental group?
I mean, we see that across groups on the left.
Yes.
Like that happens on immigration, that happens on racial justice. I mean, that's...
But if you look at the projections of future greenhouse gas emissions, you see, I mean, you have Trump on the one hand, who literally said to fossil fuel executives, if you give me $1 billion for my campaign, I will do essentially whatever you want if I get back into the White House, and you will make tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in profit. It is a good investment for you. And he's, you know, he's the guy who took the U.S. out of the UN climate agreement. He's the guy whose administration he directed to roll back over 100 environmental protections. We're talking about not just greenhouse gases, but like clean air, clean water, safety, things like the Deepwater Horizons. Well, he's like, we don't need safety valves, right? Like, those are clearly just like extra expenses for us. And on the other hand, you have, like, as much as we all wish they had done more, like, this administration has done the most investment in climate solutions of any presidential administration ever. The most of any. Inflation Reduction Act was the largest government investment in climate solutions in world history.
And I was like,
and
there
it's
hasn't
still
even,
not, like, very clearly not enough.
Right.
But we can give them a little credit, and we can assume that at the very least she's not going to roll back her own policies from the Biden-Harris administration. And that is where you have this diverging of our future, you know, emissions scenarios based on these two candidates. Like, there's a way to message that as an environmental group.
I completely
as
agree.
An unequivocal win, and like what we need, and then the strategy for pushing afterwards. What is the strategy in Pennsylvania for winding down fracking after she gets in the White House? Like, let's have that strategy ready to go.
Right.
But people aren't talking about it that way, and it's really hard for young people. And so when Sunrise Movement, which is why we have the concept of a Green New Deal, they were the ones protesting in Pelosi's office, bringing AOC into that work. They have had a really hard time with this election, but they're still doing the phone banking.
Yeah.
They're like, we have
so
to
great.
win this.
I
We're
love
not
Sunrise.
like out there like rah, rah Kamala, but they're like rah, rah, save democracy, have a chance to get climate policies passed. And we are knocking on doors to make sure that happens. And I respect that.
Yes. That's such a great call. I feel like when I mention the newer groups, I feel like that they've actually been that leader, right? Where
everyone was giving them shit for not endorsing. And I'm like, they're still doing the voter mobilization.
Yes. They're protesting Pelosi's office, but at the same time, building bridges with Markey and AOC. And it was just really incredible work.
And I think that also helps train incoming generations, or like more people, to be less rigid in that kind of purity test. And it's like trains them in a realistic view of what government is and can do.
The number of people in my comments being like, Jill Stein.
Oh, Lord.
Right.
Like, how could you call yourself an environmentalist and support Kamala? And I'm like, I don't know, you guys. Like, why do we hate winning so much? You know, why?
There's the clip.
Yeah. We're clipping that out.
Always.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I want to be mindful of your time. I know you have a book tour today.
I mean, you're coming with me to the Atlantic Festival.
I'm going to meet you there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's happening today.
Yeah.
God
What time are you
bless.
going on stage?
I mean, we're talking 19 cities, 40 events in the next 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run and gun.
Bananas.
Fantastic.
But I think
bestseller.
I do want to say, we'll find out in a few days. Everyone,
Buy the book. Buy the book.
The thing that you were asking me that we didn't quite get to an answer on was in writing this book, what did I learn or what appeared for me? And it actually is in part what I've learned from you. So Carri Twigg, going from politics, going from the White House to Hollywood, right? climate needs to be part of culture. This is a cultural conversation. And we are not only losing on the politics, we are losing on the culture. We are not seeing films on climate that are about solutions. We're only really seeing documentaries, right? We're not seeing those climate meet cutes in the rom-coms, at the composting facility, in the bike lane, at the electric vehicle charging station, right? It is not part of just the stories we are telling. And that means that's totally out of touch with reality.
Right.
Because this is what we're living in, not just the climate disasters, but the adaptations, right? The solutions, there were some very handsome men installing solar panels on my roof.
Absolutely.
Like this could have been.
Yeah.
This is a plot line waiting to happen,
Let's go.
right? Like strap in and climb up there and catch those photons for me, right? And I think
is that a metaphor? What were we
why
saying?
are we not, there's some sex appeal to be had here for sure, right? And so a lot of the way I approached creating the book and also thinking about the tour, it's like, how do we get this into the cultural conversation? I'm not reading my book aloud in bookstores as the launch. I'm hosting a climate variety show at the Brooklyn Museum with a DDR dance-off with Jason Sudeikis, with your friend Roy Wood Jr. hosting a game show about Earth versus Mars with a NASA climate scientist.
Shout out Roy,
and
friend of the pod.
Wyatt Sinak trying to rep Mars. I'm sorry, but Earth is the best planet and he lost, right?
Fun.
With Amber twerking, with a rapping Earth who's rewritten the words to a DMX song to be about Earth gonna give it to you, right? With hula hoops and sex facts about how we're screwing with the sex lives of other species. Parent Ireland. A Black magician helping us find our own superpowers to bring to climate work, right? These the sweetest ever brothers from the mid-coast of Maine singing about how love is tall. And love, it turns out, is the greatest motivator for climate action in terms of polling, 12 times more than green jobs, right? Green jobs are not that exciting to people, as it turns out. It's we want a good future. We love our children, right? And so this is I don't make movies, but this is my attempt to help position the climate conversation more in culture, and welcome people in. It doesn't have to be boring and miserable, you guys.
Yes.
That's a choice. We can take climate seriously, and we should, without taking ourselves seriously. And that's the pitch. That's why there's a playlist inside the back cover of this book, right? My anti-apocalypse mixtape.
Beautiful.
That's why there's this incredible retro futurist salvage punk art commissioned for the book by Ola Lake and Jay Foose. That's why I stepped in and was I'm gonna have to be the art director for this book because I have a very specific vision here.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful.
Right? And so I think that's the opportunity. There's so many ways that our worlds can and should be much more intertwined, right? The science, the policy, the politics, but also the culture, the music, the art. We're not saturating that. Forget the news. We're not saturating culture in the way that we need to.
There needs to be more hip hop lyrics referencing.
So the piece of press I've been most excited about with this book launch so far has been that my book tour was announced in Rolling Stone with a full tour list of every stop, right?
Let's go.
And that that's what we need.
Yeah.
We need that to be this is a cultural moment you should be paying attention to kinds of things. So, who knows what ripples this book will have, but I'm just really excited about my offering to this as an offering to the cultural conversation. So thanks for being my friend who's okay, but how do we make this relevant? Maybe?
That is so
cute,
beautiful.
Cute science, but
it's really, really
Hollywood
good.
is actually the center of power in America, as Carri will remind me. So. Yeah,
it's true. It's why the Obamas, they left office and what do we do?
It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence and I tell people this all the time. It's just I worked for at the time, the most famous man in the world.
Yeah.
And people could not repeat back to us what we were doing, when we were doing it, what we had done, what we hadn't done. They just but they could name every Kardashian, but they could name what happened last night in Monday Night Football, but they could name this, that, and the other. And it's if our entertainment and our civics are so far apart, we're going to continue to lose and continue to maintain the status quo that isn't working
Yes.
for people economically, isn't working for, I mean, it's just on every level. We need to bring those two worlds together.
Yes.
Also, it just needs better vibes. Like the
Yes.
climate movement needs better vibes. I'm just like, we have to throw a
Yes.
better party or people are not going to want to hang out with
That's
us.
true.
Yes. That
Like,
should be on a
true.
t-shirt.
We need a better
We need
color
to throw a better
scheme.
party.
We need the whole thing. I'm like, everyone, I had to like fire a web
true.
designer for this project because it was like beige and sage green. And I was like, that's actually absolutely not the vibe.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that you got the brief this wrong, but
Right.
that's not what we're doing here.
Right.
You know?
Well, you're
So,
nailing it.
Thank you.
It's really
Congratulations.
exciting. So how can people get the book? How can people
Anywhere books are sold,
Anywhere
which
books
blows
are
my
sold.
mind. I've seen it in so many bookstores.
So
I've walked
exciting.
past in the window.
So cute. I went looking for it last night at Politics and Prose, and I asked for it, and they were like, "We're literally unboxing it right now."
Oh, great.
Oh yeah, I'm
So
doing an event
exciting.
there in October. Carri Twigg will be there as well, chalking up the
Leaderboard.
MVP leaderboard
Honestly.
of Friends on Tour. See you in LA
In LA, I did New York. I'm doing LA. I'm doing DC twice.
We should just put on the screen a scroll of
Yeah.
Twig just following you around, you know, for our dozens of followers
Yeah.
of
getting up
Twig and
there.
Jenkins.
We're getting up
I know,
there,
we're getting up
man.
there. It's true.
We're
We got
getting up
to
there.
stop
I
saying
mean,
dozens.
You got to stop
There's
making
like
that joke.
there's like a Wyoming option. There's a St. Paul. There's a
Wow.
Kansas
I've not
City.
been to Wyoming, and
Atlanta's
I
gonna be a
actually
hot
would
one.
love to.
Where in Wyoming?
I need to do more time. in the West.
Jackson. There's a
I would love to go to
climate
Jackson.
solutions mountain towns summit.
Beautiful.
Gorgeous. I would love to.
So
go
can
to
people
Jackson,
just
Wyoming.
go to these events? How do people
can
go to
these
the events?
So getitright.earth is the book website.
Cool.
There's all the tour events are there with the
Great.
details. You can RSVP. Some of them are ticketed, but most of them are just free events. There's gonna be musicians and poets
So
on tour
fun.
with me.
So fun.
Each stop is featuring different folks. I'm actually really excited about the Seattle stop because I'll be in conversation with at Elliott Bay Books with the fact checker for the book.
Oh,
cool.
cool.
Who like they never get any love.
yeah,
love
that's
that.
cool.
But like we need to be accurate. Like we don't actually need to exaggerate. It's bad enough as it
Yeah.
is, right? But he fact checked my first book, All We Can Save, and this one, and my old podcast, How to Save a Planet.
Cool.
So he's like, I'm sure he'll have some spicy takes on working with me for people in Seattle.
You really nail names. I really struggled to come up with names for things, to like name branding exercises. I notoriously
put it in the group text, girl. We'll figure it out.
I notoriously hated the name of Culture House when it started. Now I love it. But
It's very good.
All We Can Save, What If We Get It Right, How to Save a Planet.
Yeah.
3 great titles.
And I'm taking this name so also in part inspired by you and actually your haphazard imperfectionist approach to just putting stuff out there.
Let it rip, babe.
Which I really, really respect. Really
Don't
respect.
let-
I'm just
Don't let
like
good be the enemy of perfect, be the enemy
So
of
I
good.
launched a Substack, a What If We Get It Right Substack that's
Cool.
carrying on the conversations from the book, interviewing new people, right? Like I didn't get to the fashion industry in this book. I didn't really get enough on the politics in this book. So I'll be doing like those conversations on the tour will show up there as like
Amazing.
audio podcasts in there. And so that's been my fun new project. But yeah, just getitright.earth has all the stats,
So
all the
exciting.
references, all the sources, all the tour. There's a reading guide.
Gorgeous.
In there,
Gorgeous.
You know?
So
there's
cool.
there's a vote climate page on the
Great.
website if you want to volunteer with those orgs. All there.
Amazing. Love it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, honey. Go get them.
Congrats.
I'm so proud of you guys. It's really great. I'm glad to finally freaking meet you in person.
We're doing it. We're doing
All
it.
right.
All right.
Love you.
Thank you.
What, you go on stage at 2?
I don't even know. No, much sooner than that.
Much sooner
What time
than
is
that.
it now? 11?
It is now 11:22.
Yeah, I know.
we
That's
should
why
let
I've
you
been
go.
trying to wrap us up for a minute.